Good morning to everyone and welcome to the breakfast meeting. It's actually our 10-year anniversary for FINNCHAM. Even the predecessor, Korea-Finland Business Council, was already established 34 years ago in 1989, but the government approved our registration just 10 years ago in November. So we don't want to show that we are 34 years, but actually there is behind that, because several of our members, like Mr. Lee and Ms. Nancy Choi, they have been 30 years in our chamber and business council. Long time members over here. Today is also, as I said, Finland's Independence Day, 106 years. And on behalf of FINNCHAM, I want to welcome you all. I have specially invited from ECCK. There is the vice chairman. The chairman was in Busan today, so he couldn't join. And then from the Swedish chamber, the board members. And from Norwegian chamber, we got very interesting people from the commercial councillor from Embassy and also the Equinor CEO from Busan. So they came for our event from Busan, and then from Valmet from Daejeon. They left early morning to drive here. So welcome all. And of course, we have the very special guest speaker today. He's from the Presidential Office and the Committee of the Regulatory Reform, Mr. Kim Jong-sok. So we are honored actually to have this event, and that's even 10-year anniversary, so we are working breakfast. So Mr. Kim Jong-sok, so he is actually has been a professor, or is a professor in New York State University here in Seoul, and he has been the member of National Assembly here in Korea, and he's the former president of Economic Research Institute here, so he should know our related matters very well and the history over here. Also, he's professor of Hongik University, and he's got his PhD in economy from Princeton University. But actually, in addition to that, he has been lecturing in Finland in 2 universities. So he's a Stones friend of Finland.
Yes, I am.
So I would welcome.
This system of reform in Korea is considered as one of the best practices of regulatory reform by the international organizations like OECD and the World Bank. So we do have a nice system, but the performance, I don't know, it's up to you, and it's not my job to evaluate the performance. But of course, I want to tell you that we are doing our best to improve the business environment, not just for the domestic companies, but especially for international investors and business people. So that's me. Okay, that's it's very comforting that the audience is not facing my face actually. The other way, that's very comforting. Please keep it that way. Okay, thank you. And I was introduced, and actually I'm a tenured professor of Hongik University for 25 years, and during that period of time, I just took a leave of absence to be the president of Korea Economic Research Institute, that is under Jeongeon, Federation of Korean Industries, and I have the honor, or maybe challenge, of being a National Assemblyman for 4 years. Now I'm leading professor of State University of New York in Korea, which is located in Songdo area. Probably many of you should know. One thing I would like to mention, because there are some Finnish friends here, as Heikki mentioned, that Hongik University and Haga Polytech had kind of an exchange agreement, and I was sent to the Haga Institute and Malmi Business School 3 times actually. I was not a full-time professor there, but during the Chuseok break I went there, and the lectured about Korean economy and business practices of South Korea and all that. And I don't know any word of them actually. I only recognize my name KIM over there, but that's a newspaper clipping from a local newspaper introducing that some strange Korean professor is talking about Korean business practices at
It says that you have conquered the Finnish students. Finnish students. That's what it says.
That can't be the news. Okay, so that was many years ago, 1997, and I went there 1999 and 2000, and then I stopped going there anymore. But anyway, that's my fond memory of Finland, and I had many Finnish friends. I mean, most of them retired by now, but I love to go back there when occasion allows me. Okay, so let me begin the talk. So the regulatory reform has been one of the major policy objectives of Korean government since 1980s. The drive for regulatory reform was pretty much initiated out of political demand and need by business sector to reduce regulatory burden and red tapes. There were two conflicting concepts of regulatory reform from the beginning. I think this is not unique to Korea, but the regulatory reform in Korea had two seemingly conflicting meanings. One is the soft reform as demanded by businesses, which calls for reduced bureaucracy and the red tape. This will make the business environment of incumbent businesses better and freer. The other regulatory reform is the hard reform, which promotes competition and strengthening market principles. And needless to say, incumbent businesses do not like that. And as a result, these differing concepts of regulatory reform in Korea, from the beginning, there was a national consensus about regulatory reform. But when it comes to detail, we didn't have much agreement. Actually, there are more of a controversy and disagreement about regulatory reform, which I'm going to talk about in detail later. There were some limiting factors in Korean regulatory reform in 1980s and 90s. The regulatory reform up to 1997 had some limitations. The reform method up to 1997 can be described as bottom-up approach. That means, under this bottom-up approach, the private business sector proposed changes in regulations and demand relaxation of rules and standards. And the problem is that the regulating officials, the regulators, determine whether to accept the proposal or not. That's why I call this bottom-up approach. So that means business sector and civilian businesses had to persuade and convince that the current regulations had to be changed. And of course, regulators do not like that approach. And since the scope of regulatory reform has mostly been on procedural reforms and reduction in red tape, many of the important but controversial areas were not even considered, leaving a major proportion of regulations untouched as so-called sacred regulations. It has been argued that since these regulations, sacred regulations, are intended to achieve important national policies, they have to remain intact unless national policy goals are changed. Examples of these sacred regulations are the regulations on banking and financial systems, the regulations to prevent real estate speculations, the regulations to regulate chaebols, big businesses, and the regulations to protect the environment, consumers, and workers, and so, etc. So, as you can imagine, these group of bunch of regulations are considered so important that it should not be considered as a target of regulatory reform. However, these regulations are the core regulations which put heavy burdens on business and economic activities. In these sacred areas, regulations are usually with the right goals, with wrong measures. So these days, President Yoon's government is trying very hard to attack these hardcore sacred regulations under the leadership of Prime Minister Han. Well, as you may remember, in 1997, East Asian countries were hit by a so-called IMF financial crisis. South Korea ran out of foreign reserves in 1997, and IMF came to help and bail out Korean economy with severe austerity measures. One of the conditions was to reform government regulations. And then newly elected President Kim Dae-jung initiated an entirely different and radical approaches to reform. The major difference of the reform in 1998 can be seen in the method of reducing the total number of regulations. The previous administrations employed, as I said, bottom-up approach. That did not go very much. And but now the burden of proof has been put on the regulators themselves. In other words, regulators must prove and justify the need for the regulations in front of an independent panel. And to perform this function, the Regulatory Reform Committee was established under President, and this Regulatory Reform Committee is now in 25th year since then. So in front of this Regulatory Reform Committee, if regulators fail to convince the committee, those regulations shall be abolished or changed. So based on this principle, the President Kim set a quantitative target of eliminating at least 50% of the existing regulations by the end of 1998. Can you imagine? That's a radical approach. As a result, it seemed impossible at first, but because of the weight of the presidential order, the total number of regulations in Korea became substantially reduced, and more than 5,000 regulations, or 49% of the existing regulations, were simply erased from the book. And the remaining 5,000 regulations, among them 2,411 regulations were modified through the review of Regulatory Reform Committee. So this radical approach of getting rid of regulations has been known as Korean regulatory guillotine in international literature since then. And that was the first step of quantitative control of regulation. And now since then, however, the public opinion and business sector said that nothing much had been changed. So we learned that the problem we had, regulatory problem in Korea we had, was not from the quantitative regulations, but the qualitative regulations and the way the regulations are enforced. So anyway, since then, the introduction of new regulations and amendment of existing regulations must go through a review process by the committee. And the basic law of administrative regulation mandates this process so that ministries cannot evade this requirement. The law specifically requires regulatory impact analysis for each new and strengthened regulations. Now the introduction and implementation of regulation is no longer the exclusive rights of the regulating ministries and agencies. And Regulatory Reform Committee consists of 25 members, and 8 members are government ministers, including the Minister of Strategy and Planning, the Economy, Finance, and Ministry of Industry and Ministry of Environment and so forth, 8 cabinet members, and 15 members are appointed by the President. They are like lawyers, professors, and journalists, and those renowned members actually. And led by 2 co-chairpersons. So Prime Minister represents the government ministers, and the civilian chairperson represents 15 civilian members, and the committee is run by as a co-chairperson system. Let me say that the Regulatory Reform Committee oversees 51 regulatory agencies in the central government. And those 51 regulatory agencies propose new and strengthened regulations each year by, the numbers are about 1,500 regulations. So Regulatory Reform Committee goes through each and every of those newly proposed regulations. And among them, about 100 regulations are considered to be very important. And then the whole committee go through the debate on those important regulations. The lesser important regulations are just administratively processed by the staff members of the committee. They are the career government officials under the Prime Minister's office, and currently there are about 100 government officials working on the regulatory review under the Regulatory Reform Committee. So now let me tell you what are the bad regulations, low quality regulations that Regulatory Reform Committee has been aiming to kill. Well, first, as I've said, we learned that it's not a matter of quantity. Regulations were eliminated. Still, the business environment and regulatory burden remained pretty high. So, especially regulatory burden can be greater with a relatively small number of regulations when those regulations require heavy compliance costs and create severe uncertainties. So the quantitative control was the first stage in 1990s, and now we are in the stage of quality control of regulatory reform. And also we learned that regulations with vague rules and unpredictable results are bad regulations. In practice, vague and opaque regulations can create a very uncertain situation where nothing is certain in Korean government, but nothing is impossible either. I guess many of you would agree. So this creates an environment where this environment conducive to corruption and abuse of power. I interviewed many international investors and foreign company executives, and most of them mentioned that the regulatory risk in Korean government regulation is the most painful aspect of Korean regulations, and I think virtually all of you agree with me about that. Regulatory risk. Actually, OECD reports mentioned this problem of Korean regulation repeatedly, and still we have the problem, and this is a primary job of Korean Regulatory Reform Committee, to get rid of these vague rules that gives wide discretionary power and interpretationary power to the regulatory officers, and that is a very unfortunate culture in Korean regulation. So we are aiming to get rid of those aspects. And third, regulations with low compliance are bad regulations. I've been myself a legislator as a member of parliament until 4 years ago. And during the legislative process, not just in National Assembly, but in the government buildings, sometimes rule makers and regulation makers become so idealistic, especially in the area of environment and consumer protection. So there are a lot of regulations that cannot be enforced realistically in the real business area. And typically these regulations, ideally, extremely ideal regulations, have a low compliance rate, and that means we have a serious consumer problem or environmental crisis, not because we do not have regulations, but the existing regulations are hard to comply, and that's the reason. So whenever we have a regulatory proposal coming to the committee, we view that the applicability of this regulation in real business practices and mandate the regulating agencies to maintain certain level of compliance rate. Otherwise, the regulation will be abolished. That's our position. And fourth, the regulations that cause excessive social costs are bad regulations. Of course, that's of course. And fifth, regulations unfair to honest people are bad regulations. Maybe some of you maybe wonder what that means. Well, the basic root of regulations is the suspicion regulators have on the private sector's ability to maintain order and honesty. But I think absolute majority of business people are honest people. They have little incentive to violate the rules or circumvent the rules. But still, regulating officials are concerned about those small number of potential violators. And all those honest people are kind of penalized. So this is very unfair to the honest people.
Yeah, you know, the Nordic people are generally in transparency also the first and very honest.
Oh, yeah. I know the Nordic countries and Finland have a high social capital, right? Social trust. So that's a precondition for regulatory reform.
That is true.
Still, we have a very unfortunate culture, especially in enforcing the regulations. The primary tool is licensing and permit system. And in many areas, the culture of, quote, prohibition in principle, permission in exception became a common practice in regulatory enforcement. And this unfortunate culture stifles innovation and creativity. So these are some of the elements we are looking into the current new regulations and current regulations to improve regulatory qualities. Now, this year, now we are in the December 2023, but during this year, we set 4 areas as a top priority of reform. And these are pretty much common sense, but first, reform regulations in new high-tech industries like renewable energies and batteries and the artificial intelligence and bio pharmacies and so forth. And second, South Korea committed itself to the 2030 NDC goal. So the Regulatory Reform Committee was trying to reform regulations about the carbon neutrality policy. And also the local governments demanded more autonomy for many years, and during this year we relaxed a lot of regulations on the local governments, and now the local governments have wider and more discretion in enforcing their regulations. And fourth, of course, the primary goal all the time is to promote investment and to create jobs through regulatory reform. And I don't know how successful we've been this year with these 4 priority areas. We are collecting reports from each ministry regarding their achievement in regulatory reform by the end of this month. So will be released to public how we have done this year regarding these top priority areas. And Currently, we are working on the next year's top priority areas of regulatory reform, and will be announced sometime in February or March. Okay, and let me conclude that first, because you are international business people and international investors, to facilitate international investment and trade, we have to align and harmonize the investment and trading rules between countries. And the regulatory reform will be the first step in that direction. However, there are still many hurdles and obstacles to overcome. The most notable obstacles these days could be the spread of protectionism and nationalism in international trade and investment. The history teaches us that protectionism never protected jobs nor national interests in the long run. In general, the degree of regulation seems to be proportional to the degree of mistrust and suspicion regulators have on the people they regulate, as I've said. So regulations become excessive and restrictive when regulators are suspicious about civilian sector's ability to maintain order and self-regulate. I'm afraid that South Korean society is not known for its social trust, especially compared with the northern European countries like Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and Denmark. Once the Korean society accumulates enough social capital, then we may have freer economy with less regulations. And secondly, the need for better and smarter regulations has become even more important as technologies and markets evolve leaps and bounds. Only a few years ago, we were amazed by the blockchain technology and its potential for financial industries. Now these technologies look outdated already. Now we are faced with yet another amazing technologies such as chatbot and artificial intelligence. These new technologies call for judicious and careful approaches by policymakers and regulators, as well as international cooperation. The challenge facing the government and regulators with these new technologies is how to manage these new disruptive technologies. Regulating the new technologies are like a double-edged sword. Well-designed regulations can promote new businesses and investment opportunities. However, poorly designed regulations can hurt and destroy evolution of new technologies and business opportunities. We should not allow the old regulations of analog era to rule the digital revolution. Again, I really thank Chairman Heikki Ranta and the members of FINNCHAM of Commerce in Korea for their contribution to Korean economy. And I can assure you that the Korean government and Regulatory Reform Committee are determined and committed to improving business environment and promoting international trade and investment with less regulations and more transparency. This is our vision of regulatory reform in Korea. I know we have a long way to go, and South Korea is not the best place to do business in the world yet, but rest assured that Korean government and Regulatory Reform Committee are on your side. And welcome to Korea. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That each of us have. I would like to start to say that the ECCK combined with the European chambers in Korea is every year producing the white paper to all the different ministries actually in Korea. But I think it should be also distributed to the Regulatory Reform Committee, because that means the combined effort of Europe is put into this white paper. Maybe Mr. Kim can ask related questions a little bit more. Then the other, actually one thing that reminds me is that we have EC is working together to make many regulations in European Union. But Korea has its own regulations, and also there is a lot of experience behind those easy EU regulations by the all European countries who are forming it. But I think Korea should be combined with that and utilize the benefit of that and try to harmonize the regulations, because we have a FTA between EU and Korea, and part of it is also to harmonize regulations. So I hope, but I don't want to, I have more questions by some members who couldn't make it this morning, but I would like to open the floor for questions and discussions. Please. I guess you all have something in the mind, so please, who would start?
And for us, we are also then part of trying to develop the offshore wind in Korea, which is a fairly new, I would say, industry sector in Korea. How can we interact with Korean government in terms of establishing efficient regulatory systems to then enable what we're trying to do jointly together?
Okay. And that office report to the Regulatory Reform Committee through the Ministry of Trade and Industry twice a year. So we get the report how they are doing. So first thing is you can contact the Ombudsman office. And then if such a proposal of a regulatory problem has something to do with the legal aspects, like then that's our job to review. So anything that is related to the rules and regulations can be sent to the committee directly. We do have the officers whose primary job is to receive those petitions and applications for changes. And once it is accepted, then we consult with the relevant government agencies, and if they do not cooperate with us, then such proposals from the business organizations and companies go to the regulatory review panel under the committee, and that panel consists of mostly former government officials and civilian representatives and specialists from research organizations, and they are pretty much the private sector side. So usually they make recommendations to relax or change regulations, and if the ministries do not comply or agree with the proposal of changes, then that proposal comes to the whole committee of Regulatory Reform Committee, and we review them. And once we decide on a certain matter by vote of majority voting, then that is the decree or order made by the Prime Minister. Actually, Prime Minister is the co-chairman of the committee, so whatever decision we take in the committee can be considered as the Prime Minister's decision. So all the cabinet ministers and regulating agencies must comply with the decisions of the Regulatory Reform Committee. And by law, that the regulating agencies must accept the recommendation made by the committee, unless there is a very serious issues involved. And during the last 25 years of Regulatory Reform Committee, no agency has ever rejected the decisions by the committee. So that's how it works. So whatever you have the proposals or recommendations, if it is related to legal aspects, related to rules and standards, then bring it to the committee, and it's our job, and we'll welcome that. Thank you.
There is also another aspect I would like to mention as an example of where maybe one should try to ease the regulations. For instance, when it comes to maritime industry, if a company wants to start to supply, for instance, energy storage systems for the green shipping, today the company has to go through all testing and verification in Korea, even though the company has tested and got verification from internationally accredited companies like DNV, ABS and so on. I think the companies understand that maybe some of the testing and verification should be done in Korea, but today, if I have understood the regulation correctly, everything needs to be done once again in Korea, and that it's quite expensive and it takes quite a lot of time. And I've also been informed that the bodies in Korea, the testing bodies, they are also quite busy. So this process could be quite challenging for a foreign company. So my comment to this cooks down to the following: that of course it would be nice if Korea could kind of approve also tests and verifications done by DNV, ABS and other internationally accredited bodies.
But also the testing process, even the European accredited testing organization have the certificates. They are not really approved in Korea, so there is no harmonization. Maybe Korean authorities require the certificates, but they want to do the test by themselves.
Yes.
So I guess they are learning that, and in the future maybe could be a good point that once you study those, you kind of harmonize the test and approve from both sides. But sorry, adding to not only shipbuilding industry.
Business practices in certification process, but we are. This is not just for foreign companies' problem actually.
No.
Korean companies also suffer from this unnecessary, redundant process of certification and testing.
Yeah.
We are working on it, and this is in our radar, and we want to simplify this. But as I've said again, the government officials are so risk averse. There are some, if there's a tiny elements of disaster or bypassing the law, then the rules become very restrictive, and this is typical example of such suspicion of regulating agencies. So, as I've said, we are working on it, and there are hundreds of cases starting from cosmetics and shipbuildings and maritime and ESS areas and all that. So, just if you can, just to send us the recommendations, and we will have a look into each individual cases, because cases are somewhat different, case by case. So we would like to know more about what's happening in the inspection process.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You have a question. So the Swedes have one question.
I remember very well during 1998 the so-called IMF crisis.
Guillotine, right?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of things changed at that time, in my perspective. I mean, being here so a long time, and I think today, my perspective of South Korea is actually, when I talk to people who want to come and invest here, is that South Korea has a lot of very positive elements when it comes to invest here. Then you have the regulatory side, which is a thing to battle with. So I have been involved in a number of businesses, conglomerates. I also invested myself and driven my private business here. And most of the businesses I've been involved in has been functioning. It takes an implementation time, and in spite of the regulations, you can come through. So I have a very positive view on investing here. And maybe I'm subjective because I've been here almost 40 years. So, but I think there's a lot of positive elements in Korea. But I do agree with the regulatory thing can be very cumbersome to fight with when you establish a new business in the country. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed. That I agree. But when you spoke, I think you gave a little bit negative impression of South Korea. I think many of us here agree that South Korea is a very good country to work in. So I'm very happy to be here and happy to work with you for the future. I'm happy to be here.
I am here now, but it's not the number of regulations we have. It's actually the way the regulations are enforced. And opaque rules and uncertain consequences. As I've said, regulatory risk is very high. I know that, and relative to other countries, the discretionary power the government officials, regulators have in Korea is too much. So we have to restrict it as much as possible. Whenever we see a new regulation or amendment of existing regulations, we look into whether these changes in regulation would increase regulators' discretionary power or not. Is increasing uncertainties from the civilian point of view. We look into that aspect, and that's most important aspect of regulatory quality. As I've said again, that the way regulations are enforced is the last frontier we have to attack. We've been, as I've said, over the last 30 years, we reduced the total number of regulations. Now we are working on the controlling quality of regulations. Now we are moving into the way the regulations are enforced. And for that, we have to deal with the inherent inclination of government officials of risk averse. And they have fundamental suspicion on the civilian sectors they regulate. So we have to overcome that. So that's the problem we are facing.
Global body, which is like 100,000 euro for the one UE, but that requires only 1,000 units in the industry. And then there is a bunch of the industrial devices, but every time we require some kind of a type of approval fees is quite much, which make us some kind of our prices increase. So to promote this kind of in the private area of this new technology investment, I'd like to get just some kind of a relaxation of this kind of approval process.
That's smart manufacturing related, for example,
exactly.
Which not necessarily apply to big public.
Right.
So it's you are now, if you compare the 5G, you talk about mobile phones and the networks,
right.
But actually the current thing is industries, and not necessarily big industries, and not huge volumes. And in that kind of case, the problem exists.
Exactly.
Okay. The good example was blockchain and fintech and the coin stuff. And these days they are struggling with artificial intelligence, and still they are learning. And we have something like a regulatory vacuum. We need some guidelines and safeguard so that the industry can develop safely and better. But still we don't have any guidelines and regulations in like blockchains or artificial intelligence and chatbots. So that's, as I mentioned during the presentation, that's one of the challenges we have. The market and technologies are progressing so fast, and the bureaucrats are so slow in adapting, and they are still in the world of analog, as I've said. And that's one of the struggles we have with the government regulating its officers. So basically we are meant to regulate the regulators. So it's always a struggle within the government between the Regulatory Reform Committee and the regulating agencies. But as you mentioned, that the redundant certification process and adaptation of new technologies into the Korean industries. So maybe we may have to educate the regulators about the new technologies and evolution of the global market or something like that. And we'll do our best. Okay. Well noted. Thank you.
Equipment. So majority of the paper you use is actually from the Barnet machines. And Barnet was established in Korean office 1995. And we have 3 operations: machinery, automation, and also valve. We have a valve factory in Chungju. And I was discussing with our potential partner about our future business, what could be discussed here. And then now we are trying to launch biomass boiler, which is helping carbon neutrality, as Mr. Kim presented here. But those power plant, we need to discuss when there is an investment discussion. Those power plant need to be approved by the local municipality, and typically the people nearby that power plant has a big civilization complaint. And municipality asks the company that if you want to invest, you need to get agreement from the civilizations, the civilians. And they are sitting like, we are just waiting your commitment. So our potential partner asked that biomass boiler is not only good for it's good for whole Korea carbon neutrality, and also it's good for the company who is exporting their equipment, because they require the REC when they export the goods to the other countries. So they would like to get support from the local municipality when there is such a civilian complaint issue. Maybe this is not a really regulation issue, but they would like to get such a support from the government.
It's very to get the approval of local residents around the plant or something. This is kind of an abuse of power, and because they don't have the legal authority to require local residents' agreement on that. So last year, once we actually made the rule that if you get more than 75% of a local agreement, then you should approve the project. But still I know for a fact that still they require 100% approval. So this is a classic example of abuse of power. And we can understand why, actually you can understand why, from the perspective of the local authority. They are kind of under the political decision-making process by the elected officials of the governors and the mayors. So it's a problem. We are looking into it, and it's already here in our radar, and we are working on it.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe Kim has been working as a commercial counselor, a lot of things, but now working with food and cosmetics. Do you have any issues in the software?
And the authorities, the Korean authorities so far, between the business and the regulation, they've been very flexible and very much supportive and guiding the small businesses. So my experience so far, yes, I know the regulation is strict, but the authority has been very much positively flexible to accommodate the difficulties of small businesses. So very good experience. Maybe two comments, not raising a regulatory issue, but just my sort of thoughts and views on the regulatory reform issue itself, as the reform is not just to abolish certain regulations, but to reform it in a better direction. For example, on the packaging waste and the packaging industry side, for your information, you might know, but EU is going to change the regulation actually in a stricter way for the environmental issue, so that by 2030, all the packaging materials to be sold in EU will have to be fully reusable and recyclable. And that applies to all countries. So Korean companies exporting to EU, they have to be in compliance to that. So our regulation here in Korea is not to abolish those environmental issues, but to harmonize and guide our industry so that they can be also competitive when they export to EU. So there are those issues. So it's not just abolishing things, but to guide the industry into the right direction to be globally competitive. So that's one thing. And then another thing is on the financial side. I understand that Korea actually failed to be reclassified as a developed market by MSCI this year. And if I recall correctly, one of the main reasons of that failure was on the financial side. That our financial industry is not, let's say, accommodating the international investment into Korea better. So if you can address those, then we will be able to reclassify it as developed market. That means actually to attract $40 billion of investment into Korea. So that will really boost the economy of Korea and make our country more internationally competitive. So I think that's also in your hand.
Very interesting. There is a regulatory agency called the KFDA, Korea Food and Drug. These guys are a headache to us. They never learn. And they are extremely risk averse.
I know.
So any medical practices, medical devices, any new food products, just takes forever to get approval. But I wonder how you are doing. Anyway, congratulations. And also so in some areas, actually, EU rules and regulations are stiffer than South Koreans, and Korean companies are very adaptive in global markets. So they are, I hope and I believe they are doing all right in adapting to the EU regulations about environmental protection. But as I've said, to promote, facilitate international trade and investment, we have to harmonize the rules and regulations. And from our perspective, EU seems to be somewhat, in some areas, somewhat over-regulated. Maybe you have to go to the European Regulatory Reform Committee if there is one. But, anyway. And also, another headache for our reform committee is the financial regulation, the Financial Supervisory Board, and these guys are also very stubborn, because they have a strong pride in what they are doing, and that's why they never learn. So this KFDA and the financial regulatory agencies are the kind of the most challenging agencies against the committee. We always, almost daily, we debate and talk with them on the issues. There are hundreds of issues raised by food and drug industries and the financial industries. We are working on it.
Thank you.
Fire test. Whenever making a building, we are using composite column and composite beam. We don't need additional fireproofing way, but in Korea we have to do again because of we have to do test again in Korea. So for fire test, we have to wait 3 years, and we have to spend €1 million, something like that.
Okay.
That's the big problem. And also second problem is the seismic test. So already in our company have a lot of earthquake test in, but again, also we have to test. So next year we will have a seismic test with Gwangju University.
Although those materials are proven to be safe in Finland or
So we got the certificate from CE mark, and also we follow the ACI code. But ACI code and KCI code is 99% same. But we have to do again.
All of it?
Yeah.
All testing?
Yeah. We have to do again.
So we are in the same boat.
I did not mention, but we have to say.
Well, that's surprising, because when I talk with the Korean companies, actually, usually they complain about the commissions and licensing and all that. But facing the international business people here, that redundancy of testing, because you have the certificate in your home countries, but having to do it all over again in Korea, that's that's a waste of resources, and it's a costly aspect. I understand. Well noted, and we'll take into account.
How about, I know the ECCK is controlling and not controlling, summarizing a lot of the things, and I already mentioned about the white paper probably would be distributed also there, but do you have something to add on the...
My question. This is not my problem, our problem, but this is just kind of suggestion. When I listening your problem, maybe there are some issues urgently we should resolve this one. So if regulatory committee has a task force to the fast track resolving system, such as the certification and also the test result, etc. Maybe test force maybe deal with those kind of urgent the certificate methods, then it will be good help for the foreign investment companies. So
I see. So it
just they can verify those tests and then give a result, right? Then the Korean government should approve those kind of
prohibition in principle, then permission in exception. But you're talking about a fast track,
right?
Emergency, urgency
right.
Causes. We don't have that clause yet, I guess. But we do have something called the sandbox. Have you heard the sandbox? Yes. But it takes 3 years. So
right.
but I see it. Okay. If you have any cases regarding this emergency petition of
right.
clearance, then give us the examples. Then maybe some Korean companies will be facing the similar challenges. That will be very good information for us.
Especially the wind power industry, and also the renewable the energy sector. They all need the kind of urgent approval from the.
I see. In renewable energy areas, there is emergency petitions. Right. Okay. Right. I'll be very curious what they are. So let me know, and I'll be anxious to having your white paper because we are very interested in the views of international investors in Korean business environment, and that's our primary job. And my job performance, the evaluation is based on how you are looking at us. So.
Actually, since 12, 13, 14, we are working with your team, regulatory.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Prime Minister's office dispatched some government officials to KCCI.
Okay, KCCI, the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, office. So we are kept working with them.
Right. Basically, the secretariat of this committee, regulatory committee, is under the Prime Minister's office. So, as you said,
so we deeply appreciate.
We have about 100 staff members working on the regulation.
Also, frankly speaking, he was an icon for regulatory reform issues.
Am I an icon?
Yeah. Before he became a co-chairman, I remember him. He was leading the team assigned by KCCI, the regulatory task force team.
Right.
So he published kind of a regulatory reform book.
So I'm partly responsible for this poor condition of business environment in South Korea.
Oh, don't be too negative. You have a positive comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do my best.
Yeah. Complements of the regulatory reforms in the business environment. So in terms of the problems, I suggest we set up more agencies. It's a joke. Setting up more agencies, maybe called anti-risk reverse government regulatory agency, something like that.
Well, that's what we are.
Okay. But actually, I have a comment or a question in terms of decreasing population in Korea.
Okay,
A huge risk for us as a nation, also on a human level too. Do you have any vision or plan to having more foreigners into the country with eased regulations and legal complications? Just a comments and question.
Yes, actually last August, in the regulatory reform review meeting, a cabinet meeting presided by President Yoon, the Justice Minister Han announced that the immigration regulations will be relaxed radically. So the professional immigrants and unskilled workers in both areas will be relaxed, and you will see the results actually sooner or later, beginning next year. In the unskilled workers level, the quota will be doubled, and in the skilled labor area, those foreign students who got degrees in Korea can remain in Korea, get a job in Korea, and can invite their family to Korea and apply for the permanent residency, just like the US and Europe and Japan. So in the past, whenever the government announces the relaxation of immigration rule, NGOs and labor unions opposed such relaxations because they're concerned about their jobs and all that. But this time they're so quiet. That means that the entire Korean people are now concerned about shrinking population. So the Koreans are endangered species more than dolphins and elephants. So Koreans may disappear somehow, maybe in a few centuries, but some people must live in this Korean peninsula. So
I hope not the North Korean.
Well, if they are behaving okay, yeah, we will welcome them, right? Anyway, it has something to do with the regulations, so that we have to relax the immigration rules. And
Bangladesh, Nepal, they have been living in Korea for several years. Now they have a Korean citizenship. So they are foreigners, but live now in Korea with the Korean citizenship. I'm a Korean with the Korean parents and Korean siblings, but now I live my life as a foreign, as a Canadian. So we are talking a lot about the low birth rate and the shrinking population. So even like 3-4 days ago, New York Times made a huge article about Korea is disappearing, So I wonder that, like even in USA and Canada, like dual citizenship is very common. So, it's very important that South Korea becoming toward multiculturalism, accept a lot of immigrants from many different countries, but also like, those Koreans living abroad to have them the chances of getting dual citizenship will be definitely an asset. Once you are abroad, even though you get a Canadian citizenship or American citizenship, whatever, but in your heart, you are Korean. You always want to do something for your home country. So I hope that someday Korea can allow the dual citizenship.
I think it's possible, although limited. I know many people who have dual citizenship, but there are a few conditions actually. You have to be old enough, and you should not dodge military draft. And with a few conditions, some people have dual citizenship, like the most notable was
political sensitive issue. It may be the big agenda rather than the specific cases, but we do believe in the current presidential office and the ruling party working hard on it. But it is a matter of the National Assembly political issue, even though how it's going on the serious accident punishment act is quite sensitive, not only for foreign experts, CEO level, but also Korean executive level. It's quite concerned and nervous, but also 52 hours maximum working hour. It is quite big nonsense for the current free market oriented democratic countries. So how it works, how it's going on, the improvement.
Yes.
I mentioned that some laws are based on extremely idealistic propositions, and the good example would be the serious accident punishment law, and also the chemical material registration regulations. And these are the most frequently mentioned the issue with the regulation regarding not just international companies but Korean companies. And President Yoon is well aware of the problem with these two laws, and actually he ordered the cabinet to change these two laws, like a serious accident punishment law and chemical material registration law. But these laws should be changed, and we need the help from the opposition party. So realistically, we have to wait until after the general election next April, and the fate of these laws will be determined at the time.
It's quite totalitarian law.
Totalitarian, and this is extremely unrealistic. And actually, the serious accidents, the number of serious accidents increased after this law. This is one of the stupidest law, as far as I can see. And even the European companies who are doing, European chemical companies who are doing business in Korea could not meet South Korean chemical material registration law. So one of the things we have to look into is the global standard. That's right. And so these two laws are way beyond the global standard, and stupid law and unrealistic, and compliance rate is really low. So we have to change. This is the primary target for regulatory reform. Yes. We are well aware of that. Wait until next election.
Actually, I had the same question, but actually the additional question is Korea is a democratic country, and during Korean War, Korea received assistance from so many countries, including ammunition, but including people, to defend the democracy of South Korea. I'm asking the South Korea, Republic of Korea, how much are you ready to support? Are you ready to send military to Ukraine's help as a democratic country? Is there a law preventing it? One is to send the people. You had assistance of so many countries when you had Korean War against those people who tried to invade South Korea. The second question is it allowed by Korean companies to export ammunition and defense material to Ukraine at the moment? Can that be changed, or is that some policy that is against the policy, like Korea received ammunition and people to support the democracy? But is Korea ready to do the same for a democratic country who is obsessed by the very aggressive country?
Yes, actually, yes. There are a lot of Korean ammunitions are being exported to European countries, but indirectly going to Ukraine. I know that, but we have the law prohibiting the offensive weapons to be exported to other countries.
Can that be changed, the law?
Well, that's not an area of regulatory reform.
No, it's a regulation. Law is a regulation.
But if you look at the law, there are some exceptional areas, that is national regulations related to national defense and judicial matter and election matter and taxation matter. These areas are exempt from regulatory review. So, but it takes more than regulatory reform. It takes presidential.
So a presidential committee can influence that, right? Because we have a good example of receiving all that support.
Maybe
in the Yu-Gi-Oh!
Finland can do more for Ukraine.
Well, we are doing one of the most countries every time compared to the population. Finland is sending both ammunition, material, and money for Ukraine.
Korea already supplied most of the ammunition to Ukraine. Korea already supplied most of the ammunition.
Oh, really?
Defensive nature.
Protecting Europe. Bigger than whole European countries ammunition supply.
The United States is supplying a lot of ammunition to Ukraine, and South Korea is replenishing the stores in the United States here. So I think South Korea is playing a good part in this happening. So.
No, because I had a request from there, and I contact FINNCHAM and Hanna. They said, oh, they cannot export, even to other countries.
Official cannot.
Official part.
There is always a way to evade regulations.
I see. So it's just a matter of
Maybe Ambassador Choi was to know better.
No, actually, I don't speak for the current government, but actually the fact is that we have a law in place. We cannot directly export military goods, including the 155mm shells, and etc., etc. But considering the alliance between Seoul and Washington, indirectly we provide the shells through the United States. But as the gentleman mentioned, as far as I understand, I might be wrong, but our supply, even though it is indirectly provided to Ukraine, our supply is much bigger than all the supplies of the European countries combined.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah. So I think we are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are playing the role to maintain peace and security in Europe as well. And then, if you allow me, let me just add one thing. And then I was responsible for all the. When I was in foreign service, I was responsible for addressing the complaints by the foreign investors here in Korea. So I fully understand the difficulties faced by the European businesses here. But from my own experience working in Europe, I served in one member country of EU. All the foreign companies have the same complaints. Exactly the same. So I think, and then the regulation, the reform is very important for the businesses. So I think it might be a good idea for the regulatory authorities on both sides to sit down together and then to harmonize all the regulations. I think but it has not happened yet. But why don't you try this kind of the consultation with the European counterparts, and then deregulation should be reciprocal. And then if Korea does it, then we expect the European counterparts to do the same thing.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe FINNCHAM and EuroCham can help us with that proposal.
Well, combining in ECCK, I think the white paper is one that is combined by all our member companies and the member chambers. So we include that is a lot of proposals.
Actually, we annually provide the handover our white paper to the European Commission every year.
I see.
Right. Last September, we already delivered our white paper to the European Commission. So, the certain some agenda issues is also discussed on working group meeting between European Commission and Korean government.
I see. I know there are a lot of talks going on in OECD framework and about harmonizing regulations among the member countries and all that. And I think it's very important to have this dialogue between EU and Korea regarding regulations and investment rules and trade rules. Right? Okay.
Very happy of the discussion, and one of the key issues is then the harmonization and cooperation. So we can provide a lot of experience through our organization, especially the ECCK, who is combining the other chambers' effort and including the member companies, which see the actual situation. And in that case, that is combined to work together with different ministries and different regulatory bodies already. Maybe the presidential committee for reform can also oversee that things go ahead on well. So the cooperation and communication with our different authorities and experience with that can be enhanced only after this meeting. So I hope that.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, thank you very much for your valuable comments and input.